Hi, my name is Clay McLeod, and I'm a grade 4-5 teacher in Kelowna. I teach for the Central Okanagan School District, and I'm a member of the Central Okanagan Teachers Association and the BCTF. I've been teaching since 2000, and I've been teaching grade 4 for most of that time. This year will be the 7th group of students that I've had take the Foundation Skills Assessment, and over the years I've been watching, and I have a pretty strong opinion about the FSA, and I have some concerns that I would like to discuss with you. I have made a PowerPoint that explains some of the concerns that I have, and I would like to take this opportunity to show it to you. So the FSA is a test that is given to grade 4 and 7 students. This year it's being given in February. So what I'd like to do to help me to explain some of the concerns that I have as a professional teacher is to show you and talk about some sample items. This item here is an item taken from the numeracy or the math part of the FSA for grade 4. And this, what you see on the screen, is actually what it looks like on a computer. So this part of the test is taken by the students on the computer. It's called the eFSA, or the electronic FSA, and this is a screenshot. So the question that I'm showing you for this example is question number 3 on the sample test that you can actually access on the internet yourself. And the question is, the students will take a bus to the nature park. The nature park is 62 kilometers away. The bus travels at 40 kilometers per hour. About how long will the trip take? And then 4 choices are available to students, and they're meant to point their cursor using the mouse at one of the circles by the choice that they would like to select. They click on it, and then they click on the box up by the number 3 to indicate that they have finished that question. So the point that I'd like to make about this question is that it's a pretty sophisticated question for a 9-year-old to be able to do. It involves calculating time using speed and distance, and it can be done. It's certainly something that I might expect a grade 4 student to be able to do. But part of the point here is that this is one question of 20 in a timed 45-minute test. So if I were giving this to my students in a classroom situation, I might expect to spend much more time than certainly the 2 or so minutes that the FSA gives the students to work on this particular question. And by the way, the exact answer isn't one of the options. So if you were to do the math, you would find that 62 kilometers divided by 40 kilometers per hour is not 1, 1.5, 2, or 2.5. It's a question where you also have to estimate, and the exact description or the exact instruction to estimate hasn't been given. It's all in the keyword about how long will the trip take, and that's something that can be a little bit of a trick question for a 9-year-old. Here are 2 other questions, and I'll talk about them briefly while looking at this slide, and then I'll explain what my concerns are with these questions in the next couple of slides. The main idea for these two problems is that both of them are multiple part problems. What I mean by that is that you have to do several steps to be able to solve each of these problems correctly. So to look at the first one, Rag, Tag, and Bobtail ate carrots. And over on the other side of the screen there's a picture of some rabbits, and that, I guess, is supposed to help the kids understand that we're talking about rabbits here. The first hint that's given is that Rag eats 2 carrots a day. The second hint is that Tag eats 1 more than Rag each day. Bobtail eats twice as many as Rag does each day. And the student is meant to take all of those pieces of information and then figure out the answer to the question, how long will it take for the rabbits to eat 72 carrots? So I'll talk about the steps that you go through to figure out that question on the next slide. But right now I'll just talk about the question on the right-hand side of the screen. And that is, Sam had a roll of paper that was 4 2/10 of a meter long. He made a banner for the fair that was 2 5/10 of a meter long. And the question is, how much paper was left in the roll? Note that the answers to this question are in centimeters, not meters. So the information that was given for the hint or the explanation part of the question is given in the units of meters, and the information for the answers or the selections that you're able to make for the answers, the units are centimeters. So for the question that I just read through, the funfair paper roll question, as I've called it, it involves decimal subtraction. So you need to take 4 2/10 of a meter and subtract from that 2 5/10 of a meter. The answer that you get in meters is 1 7/10 of a meter. But then you have to do unit conversion. So you have to figure out how many centimeters is 1 7/10 of a meter. And that's 170 centimeters. So the problem involves multiple steps. The student in grade 4, the 9-year-old, needs to be able to do subtraction involving decimals. And keep in mind that grade 4 is the first year that students are actually introduced to decimal tenths in any way, not to mention subtraction. So this is a skill that's new to the students who are taking this test. On top of that, they have to, after they figure out the correct answer to their decimal subtraction, 1.7, they have to then figure out that 1.7 meters is actually 170 centimeters, which is the correct answer to the question. This is a fairly sophisticated thing for grade 4s to be able to do, particularly since they haven't actually been instructed in the question to do the unit conversion. They have to be able to figure that out on their own. So the students can get the question half right. They can get the decimal subtraction right, but still get the answer all wrong. You don't get any part marks for choosing the wrong answer, the first choice, which was 1.7 or 1 7/10 centimeters. The first question that I showed you on the previous slide, I've called the carrot-eating bunnies question. And it involved a number of steps as well. It involved decoding the description. So the students have to actually read and understand what the hints in that question were telling them. So it was telling them that Rag eats 2 carrots. It was telling them that the rabbit named Tag eats 2 + 1 or 3 carrots, because the hint said that Tag eats 1 more than Rag each day. And it's telling the students that Bobtail eats 2 × 2 or 4 carrots, because it said that Bobtail eats twice as many as Rag. And then the students have to add up those 3 totals. They have to add up 2 + 3 + 4, and then they have to get the answer 9. And then they have to figure out that this question involves dividing the number of carrots per day by the total number of carrots. So they have to go 72 divided by 9 equals 8. So the answer to this question is 8 days. And the selections that the students were able to choose from were just numbers as well. So it didn't make it clear that the number 8 was referring to 8 days. So there's a piece of clarity that goes on there as well. The point that I'm making here is that a 9-year-old doing this kind of question could easily make a mistake and then get the whole question wrong, even if they did most parts of the question correctly. So something that a 9-year-old might tend to do on a question like this would be to figure out that Rag eats 2 carrots, that Tag eats 3 carrots, but then when it says that Bobtail eats twice as many as Rag, a 9-year-old could easily figure that Bobtail eats twice as many as Tag and multiply 2 × 3 to get 6, which would give a total number of carrots per day for all the rabbits together that's different from 9. It would be 11. And then they'd be trying to go 72 divided by 11, and they wouldn't know how to do that, and then they could get really confused by the selections that are available to them and not have any idea what the answer is, and then either get frustrated and stuck on that question or take a guess and potentially get the question wrong. So one simple calculation error could really get in the way of seeing whether a particular student actually knows what they're doing on a question like that. And part of the point I'm making here is that when I mark the kids in my class, I don't mark them like that. A student could get that question mostly correct and still get a mark that shows that they're meeting expectations. They're not getting 100% of it right, but they are meeting the expectations that I have as a grade 4 classroom teacher. This is a sample page from the grade 4 language arts curriculum. The language arts curriculum is called an IRP, or an integrated resource package, and they're available on the Ministry of Education website. And the reason that I'm showing this slide is not necessarily so that anybody reads it and goes through all of the different learning outcomes that are articulated here, but to give you an idea of the richness and the variety of the learning outcomes that grade 4 teachers are meant to try and address or teach to their students. So to give an example, underneath A2, one of the things that I'm meant to try and teach my students and to move my students towards competence in relation to is the learning outcome of staying on topic in a focused discussion. This is the kind of learning outcome, as are most of the ones on this page, that can't really be addressed with a paper and pen test. These are things that I watch in class. I have the students do presentations, I have the students do work in groups, and I use my professional judgment to see whether they're meeting the criteria. I talk with them about what the criteria will look like. I give them ideas and structured activities that help them to move towards meeting those criteria. So a paper and pen test is not a valid way of measuring the kinds of learning outcomes that were shown on the previous slide. In fact, I'm suggesting, in my professional judgment, when I look at the IRPs, when I look at the curriculum for grade 4 across math and language arts, I think that about half of the learning outcomes in language arts in particular could even be assessed with a paper and pen test at all. Part of the problem also with something like the FSA is that the FSA is scored or marked by someone who doesn't even know the student. So there's no possibility for them to use information about how the student is able to meet other learning outcomes, to be able to give them insight into what's going on in terms of a response that the student may have given. So for instance, a student could have a piece of writing on a part of the test that's not multiple choice, and it could be a piece of writing that has really poor conventions, which is one of the things that needs to be assessed in grade 4. But those poor conventions, so spelling and grammar and things like that, could get in the way of somebody marking it, being able to see that in fact the student's format for the writing, the student's meaning or the ideas that are coming across in the writing, and the style that the student is using in terms of the word choice and things like that, it gets in the way of being able to see those things as they truly are. So as a classroom teacher, if I have a piece of writing that a student has given me that has poor conventions and I'm having trouble figuring out what it is that they're trying to say because the spelling is too hard to decipher on my part, I can ask the student to read it to me, and then I can take into account when I'm assessing how they did on that piece of writing that the meaning was there or their ideas were good, the format met the criteria, there was some style in terms of word choice and descriptive language, but the conventions weren't good. So I can give them a holistic assessment, or I can assess for my own purposes holistically how the student is doing across the board as opposed to just in terms of the conventions. So the point here is that a paper and pen test that's marked by somebody who doesn't know the student and who doesn't have access to the student to ask questions about their work is something that can't really assess all of the learning outcomes that there are in the grade 4 language arts IRP. Assessing reading is another thing that is fairly complex. Reading is a complex skill itself. It involves several different skills that work together to allow a person to make meaning from text, which is the end goal of reading instruction. So the example that I like to give is the commercial that people may have seen where there is a student who is somebody who has used Hooked on Phonics, and they're able to read a really sophisticated sounding passage, but there's not necessarily any indication that the student has any understanding of what they've read. So some people think that reading is just being able to sound out words and figure out how the words, what sounds the words are supposed to make. But reading is much more complex than that. It involves understanding what the text is about, getting an idea, having some comprehension of different aspects that the author, or different ideas that the author is trying to get across. So the skills that are involved in reading range from decoding words to making predictions, to making inferences, reading in between the lines in text, to summarizing and sequencing, to being able to synthesize what the big or the important ideas of a particular text are. And lots of those things are assessed in different ways. So I might pick one kind of task or activity to be able to assess one aspect of reading, and I might pick a totally different activity to allow me to really focus in on seeing whether the students are meeting expectations in relation to a different reading skill. So this is an example of what text can look like to a student who is not fluent at grade level. So in a grade 4 classroom, with the range of abilities and in particular the range of reading abilities that there are in an average grade 4 classroom, there are bound to be at least some students to whom a grade 4 level reading passage looks like this text. It's just they can't decode it. They're not fluent at it, and it's something that they can't make sense out of. And so the question I'm asking here is the FSA good for all levels of learners, the students who are competent at grade level reading, and also is it good for students who aren't competent at that? And my answer from my experience is that this kind of test is not good for them, and it's also not really instructive about the wide variety of skills and abilities that go into being able to read. So if a student who isn't fluent at a grade 4 level can't make sense of the instructions to the test, they can't make sense of the passage that they're meant to read and ask and answer questions about, and they can't make sense of the questions themselves, then the test won't be able to provide any information about whether they're able to infer, whether they're able to sequence, whether they're able to make good predictions, whether they're able to pick out the main idea, whether they're able to remember details. It can't tell us those things about that student because the student isn't able to read anything. So it's like a gateway into the test, and if a student isn't fluent, which is one piece of the reading puzzle, they can't get in and answer any of the questions that help us to see how they're doing in relation to other pieces of the reading puzzle that are just as important as fluency. So the main point I'm making here is that a lack of fluency creates an obstacle for the student, making it so that they can't show us what they do know. In this way, the FSA is a limited assessment. Because students who are able to read grade level text are able to get in there and understand and show what they're able to comprehend in terms of a reading passage and answering questions about it, it's valid in a way for them, but for any student who struggles with fluency, which is just one piece of the reading puzzle, they are not able to get in and demonstrate any of their other reading skills, including sort of higher level reading skills, comprehension skills like making connections to previous background knowledge, prediction making, inferring, synthesizing, and evaluating. On top of this, in 2008, the FSA test went online. And so the students now, since last year, and this year, 2009, the students are, a portion of the FSA is online, so it's called the eFSA. And what happens is the students have to log on to a particular website and they provide their student code, and then they get in and they're given instructions. And the screen looks something like this. This is an actual screenshot of one of the sample sections on the eFSA. So on the left-hand side of the screen, there is a list of questions that the students are meant to answer. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a reading passage that the students are meant to read. The problem here that I'm illustrating is that within the platform that the students are logged into, and they're using this platform in order to try and answer the questions about certain passages, it's easy to get muddled around. So if you look carefully, the questions on the left-hand side of the screen are about a girl named Suki and a passage of text that tells about Suki's day at school, where Suki went to school and some things happen, and then it asks questions about that. And on the right-hand side is a totally different passage called the Earth Game. So when I logged on to the sample FSA, sample EFSA, and started clicking around, it became apparent to me that it would be easy to get lost and have the wrong passage showing with questions that relate to a different passage. And for kids, 9-year-olds in particular, who are trying to answer questions and working at what might be something that is challenging for them just on the basis of the reading, it adds a whole new wrinkle to the process. And so the question becomes, if students don't meet expectations on the EFSA in terms of reading, does it necessarily say that they're not able to read and understand what they're reading? Or is there a chance that it's saying they had trouble negotiating and navigating within the platform, within the computer program that they're trying to use to answer the questions? So my answer is that I certainly think that there's a question, and it adds a whole new, a whole variable to the process, so that it raises a big question about whether the test is really testing their reading ability. There's an even more important question, and for me, it's the question of assessment for learning. In the district that I work in, we as teachers and administrators are trying to work together to move towards an approach to marking and evaluation that is called assessment for learning. And the idea behind assessment for learning is that when you're doing assessment or evaluating or giving students feedback on their work, the purpose of doing that is to help the students see how they can do a better job in the future, and to help you as a teacher see what things you can do in your teaching to help the students learn better in the future. So one thing that we say is that we try to use assessment, or are looking at the products of students' work, we try to use that to help inform our instruction, or to help us decide how to teach to the students in an even more effective way. So as a professional teacher, that's the main thing that I want to get out of the marking or the assessing and evaluating that I do. I want to be able to use the information I get to support and promote my students' learning. When I get the FSA results for the students in my class, all it tells me is that a particular student either met expectations, exceeded expectations, or is not yet meeting expectations. And this isn't helpful information for me. I already know that. I know that within the first couple of weeks of school. The kind of assessment that I do gives me information that is much more specific and helpful to me as a teacher. So it might tell me that a particular student has really good ideas, but for instance, to go back to the example that I was talking about before, their conventions, their spelling, their grammar, those things aren't very good. So then that tells me that when I'm teaching that student, I want to try and give them tools to get better at conventions, at spelling and grammar, but I already know that they're really good with ideas. They've got lots of good ideas and the substance of their writing is already there, so I don't need to worry about that as much. Or it might be the other way around. Another question that comes up about the FSA is the question of whether it really tests the curriculum. And the point here is that the FSA is given in February. So the FSA is coming up, right now is the end of January, and the FSA is coming up next week. The midpoint of the school year was earlier this week. So this year the FSA will be given about a week after the halfway point of the school year. So the problem there is that it tests the entire curriculum. I haven't had a chance to teach the entire curriculum. I'm going to be doing that for the next few months. And this test, given in the middle of the year, is testing the students potentially on learning outcomes that I haven't had a chance to address yet. They might be learning outcomes that I'll teach in May. They might be learning outcomes that I'll teach in June. And they're getting a test right now in the middle of the year that is expecting them to have learned and gained a certain level of mastery at those learning outcomes. It's almost certain in every grade 4 and grade 7 class across the province that there will be skills tested on the FSA that the teacher hasn't had a chance to address with the students yet. Another concern that teachers, professional teachers have about the FSA is that there is a bit of an agenda going on, and it's not necessarily the intent of the ministry putting out the FSAs, but it is an agenda that exists nonetheless. And the agenda here is that the Fraser Institute is taking the information that is generated by the FSAs and it ranks schools based on that very limited snapshot. So it's a snapshot that's offered by a multiple choice, one-size-fits-all test. It's given to all students in grade 4 and grade 7. It doesn't really account for the rich tapestry of learning that goes on in different schools in different places. For instance, one of the things that I did the week coming back from Christmas with my class was there was lots of snow. There had been a real good buildup of snow. So I took my kids out into the field of the school and taught them how to make quincies or snow shelters. So we spent an entire day doing that. So they learned some survival skills. They learned teamwork. And then what we did was we went inside and I got them to read a little bit about how to write good instructions, and we looked at some examples of writing good directions and instructions, things like recipes. We looked in the textbook to see what the criteria would be for good instructions. And then I got the students in my class to write instructions on how to build a snow shelter or a quincy. And the students produced really good work that was it represented the work that they had done out in the field, working together, and it represented their abilities as writers. It was something that was engaging. It was something that they were motivated to do, and it was a really rich experience. But that's the kind of thing that the FSA is not necessarily going to capture if the writing sample portion of the FSA doesn't ask my students to write instructions. And in particular, if it doesn't ask them to write instructions in relation to a task such as this, it's not going to capture the full range of their abilities. And part of the problem here is that the schools at the bottom of the rankings aren't private schools. And there are some reasons why this is. One of the reasons has to do with the fact that public schools value diversity. As a public school teacher, I am happy, and I feel that it's part of my work as a public school teacher to take in all students who come to my class. It doesn't matter how challenged they are, how needy, how disadvantaged, how hungry, or how poor they are. I'm going to do what I can do to do the best job for every single student who comes into my class. And that puts me, as a public school teacher, and it puts public schools in general, in a different position than private schools who are able to put some limits or put some exclusion on who they're going to take into their schools and into their classrooms. To me, the fact that anybody is able to go to a public school, no matter what their situation or their background is, that's something that's actually a positive aspect about public schools. That shows that it's a democratic process, it's a democratic institution, and it's something that's there for all students. There's an aspect of inclusion and equity, and these are things that are really important. They're not necessarily things, though, that can be measured on something like the FSA. And to me, this Albert Einstein quote really sums up what's going on here, the balancing act that needs to be taken into account here. And the quote is this: "Everything that can be counted does not necessarily count, and everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted." So the FSA may count or measure and give a number in relation to some things, but it doesn't give a number in relation to everything. And there is a whole lot of stuff going on in public schools that can't necessarily be boiled down into a number or a statistic to help to rank schools. And that's because public schools educate for democracy. So the British Columbia Teachers Federation opposes the FSA, and we have, as a union, taken a vote, and 85% of teachers in BC who voted in this particular vote have voted not to prepare for, administer, or mark the FSAs this year. And the reasons that I've gone over in the preceding slides are the reasons why I voted not to administer the FSAs to my grade 4 9-year-old students this year. Thank you for your attention. And if you would like to get some more information in relation to this, you can go to the BCTF website at www.bctf.ca, and there is information there that you can get from the BCTF perspective on the FSAs.